Today, day 89, I'm talking about the inner game. This last week, I was teaching my nephew how to ski. So we were spending 2 or 3 days skiing, and my daughter's become a pretty good skier for her age, but my nephew went with me, and so we were skiing, and I was trying to teach him how to ski, and I think I did okay because I just mimicked what I saw other ski coaches do, and so I think he got the hang of it pretty quickly. But then after the first afternoon of me teaching him, his abilities regressed. He started getting worse. And it's because he was just thinking too much. There was too much going on in his head. And even though I kept trying to convince him, how to do it differently, it was just not working for him. Later that afternoon, or I think it was the next day even, my cousin went with me. And my cousin, she's a great skier. She's been skiing her whole life. And my nephew and her were skiing together, and I was doing something else. But what happened is while he was watching her ski, he started to figure out what it was that the thinking he was doing that was wrong, and he adjusted that. And he made a rapid transformation to improve the way that he was skiing. So in about 2 to 3 days, he was a pretty decent average skier at that point. Which is interesting to me that hands off was really the answer. This reminds me of a book I have on my shelf by a guy named Tim Gallwey. Timothy Gallwey is a famous coach, a writer about coaching. He had this series called The Inner Game. His first book was The Inner Game of Tennis, because he was a well-established tennis coach. And then he wrote The Inner Game of Golf, which is the book I have. And then he wrote The Inner Game of Skiing, actually, too. And I think a few other inner game books. They were very popular in the 70s, maybe the 80s. But his concept was that what's really going on with coaching is less about what you're telling them to do and more about the mental process going through somebody's mind. The psychological barriers are the thing that really gets in our way. The greatest opponent is not, he said something to the effect that the greatest opponent is not the opponent on the other side of the net. The greatest opponent is the opponent in your own head. And so that's an interesting concept. So thinking that through, I'm starting to wonder about my own self and how much, Galloway even had this thing called the self one and self two. Self one is what's going on in your head. Self two is the part of your brain that makes the mechanical functions of your body work. And when self one can start trusting what self two is doing without getting involved, then self two will hit the ball better, ski better, swing the club better, whatever the case may be. The idea is, I wonder how often, and I think it is quite often, that my own head is getting in my own way of my progress. Or how often I have tried to coach somebody, quote unquote, and told them what to do, when in reality, all they needed is a judgment-free environment for them to think it through themselves and to get out of their own head. So that's the worth a find if you can find one of the Tim Gallwey books and read it. Not just for the sport, but for the general concepts that he teaches. So there you go.